Hey, J-Bone Nation! Shaming of Jay. He's not a dopey dumb bitch. He gets laid. The court jester. The court DJ. It's time to dive into the case. To the case.
What is up, everybody?
Hello.
What's going on? I see Amanda, Afie, Paulie, Dizzy, Tracy. Our first ever interview.
Ashy is here.
Simulcast.
Liz.
On YouTube and Kick. We are super excited about this interview because Jessica is another one of those folks who's like super established, and like we're gonna go into it, but like is a woman who rocks and is kind enough to come on the show with me and Shannon. And I put, by the way, guys, I put in, this was on purpose. I put Jessica Bowl because she's a Bo now. You guys know her. I put B-O, and I got a text from Bob Mata, and he says, "You got a typo in your tweet." And I said, "No, Bob, it's Bo." But even though it's Jessica Noll. Go ahead, babe. I feel like you're going to say something.
The great thing about it, though, babe, was that Bob texted you like immediately right after you posted it, like the best editor in the world.
That's
honestly.
True. So
split second.
He did. It was very quick when he did that. So what's up, everyone? Thanks for being here. Jessica Noll, if you didn't know, is an award-winning investigative journalist and writer. In 2018, she shifted her focus to audio, storytelling, and true crime. Since then, she's produced several chart-topping podcasts. These are not little baby podcasts. These are legit, folks, including Dateline's Missing in America, Bardstown, which had some breaking news, folks, Five Roses, The Officer's Wife, Selena, A Star Dies in Texas, Culpable Season 2, and was the producer, writer, and host for the #1 Apple podcast, Undetermined. When I say women who rock, Jessica is a woman who rocks. She was also the producer and co-host of the daily true crime podcast, This Day in Crime, and the weekly podcast, True Crime Chronicles. She appeared on HLN's Real Life Nightmare, Fox News, Crime Stories with Nancy Grace, CourtTV's Opening Statements, which we watched together, folks, and Closing Arguments, amongst others, for her investigative reporting. So without further ado, here she is, a woman who rocks, Jessica Noll. Jessica, thank you for being here.
Hey, that list just made me tired.
Oh, there she is on the screen. Does everyone see that? There's Jessica on the screen. So this is amazing.
Let me just tell a little story about that emoji, though.
Go ahead.
So it's hard to like come up with, I want to do different emojis for everybody, you know? So I'm like, oh, gosh, I've already got people on with crowns all the time. I've got like too many people with crowns. So I'm not going to do a crown, but I wanted you to be a queen. So I'm like trying to get AI to change your chair that you have to a throne. It literally was like putting a throne on your head. It was like under your chin. So I finally gave up. I'm like, I'm just going to do like an aesthetic crop. It's not just her head. I don't feel like women really like it to just be their head like floating around. At least I don't.
Need hair.
Yes, exactly. So I'm like, I'm going to give her like the full little, profile. But I was so mad that I couldn't get you on a throne. So I'm very sorry.
All right. And I turned that off now, guys, because I can see that's going to be distracting. And we're not going to do that. But ever since we got kicked off the old YouTube and we couldn't use them anymore, it's pretty cool now that we can use them on Kick. So, babe, why don't you start off?
Well, I think we should start off chronological. And I just want to ask you, what kind of child were you growing up? What was little Jessica like?
Oh, well, I think the opinion of that would vary based on who you ask. But since you're asking me,
Mhm.
um, I was the baby, so I was the youngest of three, two older brothers. And I'm like the baby. So they're 8 and 10 years older than me.
Oh.
So do with that what you will. Like people say
Mhm.
spoiled, but you know, I don't know. I had to learn very quickly with two older brothers how to stand on my own and stand on my own 2 feet and defend myself. And because I was teased a lot, they took my toys. They like played keep away. I have a scar on my head from them daring me to run into a beanbag, and I missed the beanbag and hit my head on a rocking chair and had stitches when I was little.
Oh.
So that was also like, if you dare me to do something, I'm gonna do it. Um, yeah, I don't know. That was, I guess I turned out a little scrappy
Yeah,
from
they made
that.
you ready for anything.
Well, I mean,
They did.
were you were you a little journalist? Were you like reporting on things, or finding out which teachers were having affairs, or which people were in relationships? Were you breaking news early on when you were young? Not no.
No, no. I actually, journalism was never even on my radar
So
when
how
I
did it
was
get into your
younger.
radar?
Well, first I wanted to be a teacher. And then once I was in high school, I decided I wanted to be a nurse. So that was like my full focus. The only touch of journalism in high school, I was on the school paper. And that was mostly because I loved writing and I loved English class and composition and report writing. So apparently like journalism was sneaking into me, but I didn't realize it. So I was going to be a nurse. So I went to college and started out as a nursing major. And within the first semester, I loved all of my writing and English classes way more.
Mhm.
So I switched majors to English. And I'll never forget, my dad was like, "What are you going to do with that?" And I was like, "I'm going to write." And that was my first year in college, and that was my goal. And I didn't know what that goal meant. I just wanted to write and tell stories. And long story short, um, my first journalism job was because I saw there was an ad for a reporter for a small newspaper, and I wanted to write. And I had taken one media class in college, and and I used, my samples were college written papers, and my editor gave me a shot, and I was there for 2 years and decided I want to go to grad school and learn everything I can about journalism. I felt like I had a pretty good foundation, and then I went to grad school and got my master's in journalism.
Wow, I'm curious. And this, I do you remember your first story? Do you remember?
Yes.
Yes, let's hear it.
Oh
Yeah.
yeah.
I mean, it's not all that exciting, but
Oh, it's
I
exciting.
actually
Let's hear it.
I have every article I've ever written. The first one, and I don't remember his name, but I can see him in my head. The first one was about this author, and he had just written a book, and he was very self-promoting on himself, so it's probably good I don't remember his name. But he was like, had this like yellow blonde buzz cut, and he was like wearing a suit, and he was all excited about him. You know, he was one of those really jazzed up people. And it was basically a profile interview. And that was my very first article, was about this guy who wrote a book, and it was telling his story. I mean, it wasn't really all that exciting.
That's still cool that you remember it and that you keep all your stuff. That's cool.
Oh,
Um,
my mom did too. Like, she would make me keep a paper every week that came out. And when I moved back to where I am from, she had boxes of all of my old newspapers from my first job.
I know you have a question, babe, but before I do, I can't believe I'm looking at your background. I did that whole bio, and I didn't even mention that Jessica is co-host of the Investigators with Todd McComas, and I didn't even mention that. Make sure, let me put it in the chat. But I added to the prompt here, guys, that they are now starting a YouTube. So please make sure to subscribe to the YouTube. They're putting their content on there, and it's really good. So check it out, folks. Sorry, how do I do that whole thing and I don't even mention the investigator? What dope. Sorry, babe, you go ahead. Go.
I was just going to ask you about as your career as a journalist, when you did print journalism and all the other types of journalism that you did, can you tell us about one of your favorite adventures where a story took you?
Hmm. Hmm. Full disclosure, I am 44 years old, so I've been doing this for like 24 years, and you just put me on the spot to like think for like 2 decades of stories. Like every story I do is an adventure, and it's not about geographic location or it's telling those stories and talking to people and really connecting with people. Man, that's a great question. Can we come back to it?
We sure
Yes,
I'll
can.
think about it a little bit.
Of course.
Well, speaking of like just when
Oh,
you're
wait.
go ahead.
I think I just remembered. And this is a really early on, but I was just thinking of like an adventure, and this is actually a travel thing. So I was working for excuse me. My local TV station here that I was working for, I was a digital journalist at that time there, and there was the pro-life march going on in DC, and we were going to cover it. Well, my story angle to it was this bus of people, which I'll get to in a second, were going to march, and so I was going to document their journey. Well, it was a bus of nuns. And so I traveled from Cincinnati to DC on a bus of nuns, and I documented their journey to Washington DC to march for that. So
Wow.
it was great. It was great. I grew up Catholic, so, but it was so interesting. I haven't even thought of that in so long, but like they would do prayers on the bus, like out loud and everything. And it was like, that was one of those times where it really helped me to observe really well to tell the story as it was happening. So I really started like my live, that was actually, I think, one of my very first live blogs. So I would start just documenting what was going on around me, and that really helped hone that skill for me to observe really well and take notes while, not just quotes of what people are saying, but just observing what people are doing and what they look like and they sound like and what's around us and what we're passing on the highway and all kinds of stuff. And so yeah, that was a really interesting adventure in journalism, if you will.
Yeah, that's such an interesting experience. I mean, how many people can say that? Not many, I don't think. You were like in the inner sanctum, kind of like with all the.
And
you were like Whoopi Goldberg in Sister Act.
I didn't join. Okay, so,
exactly.
And it wasn't just nuns. I think it was like the whole archdiocese. It was anyone who wanted to go, but it was a lot of nuns. I remember that.
So I'm curious. We're talking about adventures, and something I'm super curious about, because Todd talks about this, and you talked about like, people being brave, and he's like, I'm not brave. Jessica is brave. She will go up to anyone's freaking house and knock on that door, and I'm just so curious. Like, were you always like that? Did you have to build that confidence? Like, what is that like to go and knock on people's doors? Some of who, or maybe a lot of whom, do not want you knocking on their doors, but you're going to get the story. What's that like? How did you get that confidence? Were you always like that?
No one wants to answer the door when I knock on it. But when they do answer it, that's when it's great. And it's like, the people that we're referring to are people that are a very big interest in whatever the story is. So let me be clear. I don't like cold door knocking on a victim's family or a victim. But I relish in door knocking on someone who is a person of interest, because they're not going to answer the phone when I call, and they're not going to answer an email. They might answer their door. And when they do, at that point, it doesn't much matter what they say to me, because I got them in front of me. I have a captive audience, and that's when I can pepper them with questions, and whether or not they answer them can be telling either way. I don't know even where that started. I'm not, I mean, I don't, it's like, you know, when you're in journalism, you're assigned to do things. And they're like, we need you to go door knock on this person. And that's what you go do. And it's part of your job. And you have to, I am not someone, my husband is, but I am not someone who can just go up to anyone and be like, hey, how you doing? Let's have a small talk about it. Mm-mm. But this is different because this is my job. So I know what I'm coming to talk to you about. I don't like small talk. I have a mission, and I know what I want to say to you and what I want to get out of you and how. And the thing about door knocking is, you know, when you interview someone sitting down, you have the luxury of letting that trust build and letting them get to know you and know they can trust you and they can open up to you, even if it's within 5 minutes. When you door knock, it has to be immediate. You have to immediately put them at ease so that they are willing to speak to you. And, you know, one thing I guess maybe I have going for me is I don't come off as aggressive in stature, because I'm pretty little, I'm short and everything. I think I come across as nice and gentle, and, you know, but I'm going to ask the hard questions. They're coming. Just wait. And so, I don't know if that answered your question.
Yeah, it did. You know, one thing I'm thinking of when you're telling this story is, I'm just curious. Like, I'm just thinking of when I used to work at, you know, insurance, and like the first thing they had to teach me was like to do a recorded interview with people. Someone got into an accident, and like I had to call them, put on the recording, and go through it. And I just remember being like, when I wasn't in a job, like that was my first job. So like, I'm curious for you. And they made me, we did training and we did fake ones. And I'm just assuming for you, it's not like you're going out there with another reporter and they're like, this is my trainee. Like, you have to just learn this like on the fly, right? Like I imagine that must be like just different. Like I'm sure you're away, you know, better now than when you first started. But like, is there any training? Does anyone like say to you, this is what you should do? Or are you just like, they're like, go knock on that door, and you're like, all right, I'll figure it out, I guess.
I don't know. I mean, I don't really feel like there was any training. I mean, it's just, it's in our nature, I think, as a journalist to be curious and to ask questions and want answers. And I guess maybe my first taste of that is I worked with an investigative team early on in when I was working in TV. And, you know, I was, you know, a newbie at that point. So I did just kind of follow them around and watch them. And maybe that was where I kind of got that. And then when I started working on the TV side of things, and I was an on-air reporter, I mean, door knocking was all the time, because it's daily. You got to get that story. You got to get those answers, whatever it is. And so now I guess I just use that, that experience and put it towards these people that no one seems to be able to interview or get. And I'm like, well, it's not, I mean, the worst thing they can do is just slam the door in my face. But, you know, there are other worse things that could happen, obviously. Right. But I never do it alone. And that doesn't mean like I take someone with me up to the door. I mean, there's always going to be backup in the car every single time. That was one thing when I was in mainstream media, is I refused to door knock completely alone. And I didn't mind if our photographer stayed in the car or what have you, but it's just not safe to do something like that, because you're catching that person off guard. No matter if they're innocent or guilty or whatever, that's their space, and you're, even just by door knocking, you're invading that space. So you never know what you're going to get with that. So you have to be very cautious and very careful. And I'm always aware of my surroundings and what's going on all the way around the house before I ever knock on that door. So it's not just a haphazard, knock on the door. I know what's going on around me. But yeah, I don't know. I will tell you, it's one of the most exhilarating things you could do, though. Like, I am so nervous right before I do it. But, I mean, and it's not even nerves about who I'm about to talk to. My nerves come from, I want to make sure I get every question out I want to ask. Even if they don't answer them, or if they tell me something else, or, and that has happened, or they say, well, fuck you, and they slam the door, and that's happened. I don't care, because I just got audio of you yelling at me and slamming the door. What does that tell my listeners?
Right.
And so, I don't know where I was going with that, what I started that sentence with, but,
I think you answered the whole process of going up. Like, it's just, to me, it's fascinating, because I am an introvert and I could never do it. I can go in here and like be on the computer, but when we had to go out in the field, Shannon was the one who was mingling. I couldn't talk to anyone. Just to me, that's, so I give you just like Todd said, you're the one going up and knocking on these people's doors, and you don't know what's coming.
Well, I mean, and that's the juxtaposition of Jessica Noll, right? And I never talked about myself in third person, but there it was. I am an introvert. I'm not going to go up and talk to anyone. But when I have a job to do and I have a story to tell, and people deserve to hear what this person's going to say, that changes the game. So for me, sitting down with people to interview them and talk to them, now it's completely different when I'm on the other side of that. Like, if I'm coming in and I know what I'm there to ask you about and talk to you about and have a conversation about, that's one thing. That's why I always get nervous. I'm not nervous today, but that's why I get nervous about live TV, like Court TV. It's like, I don't like being on that side of things. I like being on the side of asking the questions. But no, it's something that, it's so exciting, because you want to make sure, and my example is Brooks Hauk from Bardstown. He answered the door. I talked to him, but it's like, you hear me ask him all the questions that the listener wants to know. All the things I want to know are the same thing the listener wants to know. Do you know where Crystal is? Do you know and actually he says things about being a suspect. So you don't have to listen to it. I'm not going to spoil it, but it's like, he doesn't answer any of my questions. And I think sometimes that can be even more telling than when someone does answer your questions. But it's a matter of even if he's standing there, not answering you, or he's doing something else while you're trying to talk to him, it's fire those questions out, because you have maybe 2 minutes and 30 seconds before he shuts the door on you. So that's where my nerves come in, making sure I get all those questions out and not lose my train of thought when I knock on the door and they answer.
Well, let's stick a little tiny pin in the Bardstown, because we're going to get back to that. But babe, I know you have a question, so go for it.
Well, I was just wondering so you shifted your career in 2018 to podcasting. And what was the inspiration for that? Why podcasting? Why true crime? I'm so glad you did, but why?
Well, I mean, I've been covering and investigating crime and trials and cold cases most of my career. And everywhere I went, I always wanted to cover cold cases. And because I would cover murder trials, and I would cover, I would sit in the courtroom every single day, kind of like you guys do now on YouTube. But that was my job, being, for a month, I would sit in the same courtroom every single day and, write stories from that, or write live blogs from that. And so I learned so much about the system that way and everything. And I covered breaking news in crime. I covered investigative, crime stories. But what I love to cover is cold cases. And there's a reason for that, because cold cases are the ones that need the most attention. And everywhere I went, I would always pitch cold cases, and it would always come back with, oh, there's no update, so there's no news. And I'm like, that's because it's not getting attention. It's a 10-year-old cold case. It needs more leads coming in. And when I went to Atlanta and started working there, I pitched a cold case series called Gone Cold. And I wanted to highlight all these cold cases and do long forms on them. And my journalism is different, which actually plays really well into podcasting, because my journalism, the way I write, is very narrative. And so I wanted to read like a novel. I want people to like be so engrossed in this and feel like they know these people that they want to do something. It's not just like this big of a read and you just get the bullet point notes in it. So I pitched Gone Cold, and my editors were amazing and supportive, and they loved it. And that's what I got to do for like 3 years in Atlanta, was cover cold cases all the time. And, you know, there were times where the stories that I covered, not from anything I did, but like, you know, later down the road, they would get solved. And it was like, that is such a great feeling to know that a case that I was so invested in covering and telling that story, like it has some closure to it. So that's really like, you know, my shift from journalism being general assignment, covering everything and anything under the sun, into what I really had an interest in was crime. And then it was like, it's cold cases, because at that time, no one was really covering cold cases. It's a big thing now. But it wasn't then, because there was so much pushback because there wasn't news out about it. So to answer your question about how that shifted to podcasting, I've gone from newspaper to digital to TV. And when I was doing TV, I was a multimedia journalist, which meant I shot all my own stuff, which was audio, video, everything. And I edited it, I wrote it, I fronted it in front of the camera, which don't like. But I did everything for those stories. So I really got the feel of, you know, learning how to use all the senses to tell the story, you know, seeing and hearing and everything. And my first audio story was about a homeless shelter. And I told the stories of like a dozen homeless who were living in this shelter, and it was a cold shelter. It was only at night. And I went in for months every night and sat down with them and just told their stories. And that actually was when I was on the digital team, and I think it was like 2007. So this is before podcasts. This is before any of that kind of stuff. Because I didn't want people to just see them and have some perceived notion about them. I wanted them to hear their stories and what their lives were like, because they were all so very different. And you never know what happens to someone that puts them on the street like that. So that was actually, I just thought of that. That was my first audio story in 2007. So I've always had an interest in telling the story in any way I can in different platforms. And you know, after TV, I went back to digital, and I was doing a lot of digital videos and like mini documentaries on digital. And I did one more that was a audio story, and it was all about these folks with disabilities that played all these musical instruments. And I did it that way because it was all, you know, it was so musical, and I was like, that would be a really cool audio story. That was like 2015. And so, or actually like 2013, I should say. So after I went to Atlanta, I was on my way to Mississippi to do an interview. And ironically, it's for the story that has a huge update for me today. But I was on my way to Mississippi, and ironically, I was listening to this podcast because someone had recommended it to me. And it was set in Mississippi. So I was like, well, this is weird. And like an hour into this, I don't even remember which episode in the series it was, but like an hour in, I'm driving through rush hour Atlanta, still on my way to Mississippi. So it wasn't even that far yet. And I'm like crying. And I'm like, oh my God. Like, and I thought this story was like a true crime story. And I'm like, well, there's no, okay, I don't know what the crime is yet, but oh my God, this is such a good story. And I have since listened to that podcast like 3 times, and I'll tell you what it is in a second. But I listened to it all the way to Mississippi and all the way home until I finished it. Then I made my husband listen to it. Then I listened to it again, and I think I've listened to it since again because it is that good. It's such incredible storytelling. Have you ever listened to Shittown?
Yes, I knew you were going to say it. I was like, she's going to say it, S-Town. I know she is. I know she's going to say it. It's mind-blowing narrative.
I was like, this is what I want to do. This is the kind of storytelling I want to do because it touched me in so many different ways, in none of the ways I expected. And I was like, this guy is a genius, and I want to know how he did this equipment-wise. So I started doing my research on equipment. And I was like, this is the way I want to tell a story. This is how I want to tell a story. I want to do this audio. And we hadn't done that at my news station. And I was like, so I went in and I was like, I want to do a podcast. And no one knows really what a podcast is. I mean, at that time it was like, that podcast was out and, oh, this is awful. I can't think of the huge one. Serial. Thank you. Yeah, that's about it. Right. Serial was out, and it was like everything was still so brand new, and it was like they were like, well, you're gonna love this. So I don't even remember. I think this is because I went to her and I said, someone had recommended me going to her or something for a cold case because she was the guru of cold cases because she had a research institute. And you might know who I'm about to get to. So I went and I met with her and I was like, hey, do you have any cold cases? Because this is even before I was really approved to do a podcast. I just wanted to cover another cold case. So I was reaching out to all the police departments in Atlanta, and there's no shortage of cold cases in Atlanta, as you can imagine.
Yes.
Does she say sugar and honey? But go ahead. I'm sorry. Like sugar?
What's that?
Does she like end sentences with sugar and honey? Or am I thinking of someone else? Go ahead.
No, she might. So I go to her and I was like, I hear you have, you can help me with some cold cases. And she's like, I've got the one for you. She was like, she pulls out these binders and she's going through these case files with me. And she was like, this is it. And she's talking about this task force that she's on. And I'm like, all right, well, let's get with this task force. It's got all these retired detectives. It's got, her. And she's, a genius in her. And she's at this little police department. But like her network is like outrageous. And I'm like, all right, cool. Okay. And the more I'm listening to her and her incredible Southern drawl and her stories and her voice, I'm like, and then she introduces me to a guy named John. I almost said John. No, a man named John. And
changes the story.
Right. And he's telling me this stuff. And then they introduce me to the other ones on the task force. And then I get into the other police department because this is a 50-year-old cold case with 2 victims, 2 different police departments. Then you have Atlanta Police Department. And then the FBI got involved. And this was all in the 1960s. And I'm like, this is like, you just handed me like my podcast. And that was my very first podcast. And it was with Miss Cheryl Mack McCollum.
Yes. Okay. And what I would say when Cheryl comes on, when Matt comes on, she goes, you know what I'm saying, sugar? Or she says, honey, it's a little dopamine hit. And it's like, oh, that feels good.
It is.
Oh, when she says, oh, that's like, it's like, I feel better now. I could be having a bad day. Max says sugar or honey. She's the best. That's such an amazing story, Jessica. Wow. She's everywhere, Mac. So
that is how I met Cheryl McCollum. We worked on 5 Roses together. So if you haven't listened to 5 Roses, she still loves to talk about it and loves to talk to me about it. It is an amazing tragedy and story, and it's focused on not only these two women, but the connections between them and the unsolved nature in it, but also this task force that just comes together and volunteers to investigate these cold cases, and it's amazing. And there's a special place in my heart for that podcast because it was my very first, and I didn't know what in the hell I was doing, but I just knew I wanted to tell this story. I know how to tell a story, and hopefully the audio sounds good enough that I can tell it. And and that's where things happened and took off. And I had, that was in 2018. And at that time, some things had changed with my family dynamic, and we wanted to move back to where we had come from, which is here. And so we both told our employers that we were going to move back, but we wanted to figure out a way to still do what we were doing in Atlanta. And turns out that a subset of my company was starting a podcast unit, and it was remote. So I started with Vault Studios, and that was where that's where I did Bardstown as my first podcast with them. We subsequently did An Officer's Wife, which was a case that I investigated with Brendan O'Keefe in Atlanta also. And then, Selena started Eyes in Texas. We got to go to Corpus Christi and meet Selena's dad and sister. And I mean, when you ask me adventures in journalism, it's like every story I do is an adventure in one way or another. Sometimes it's a tragic adventure. Sometimes I'm fangirling because I love Selena and I'm meeting her family in the studio where she's singing in the movie. When Jennifer Lopez is singing in that studio, I stood in that studio with her dad. That's cool. But anyway, so we did so many amazing podcasts together. And then, moved on to Resonate, worked on Culpable Season 2 and Undetermined, which is where I met Todd McComas.
Well, here we go. I mean, that leads us right into it.
Yes.
Tell us about meeting Todd, what that's like, and how you guys started the investigators. Like, tell us about it.
Oh, I love how Mandy Jo just said, anything for Selena's. That's so good. Oh, and by the way, I also went to her favorite restaurant and got to order like her favorite dish. And I'll tell you all a story about that later. So Todd McComas. So Undetermined had actually started. It was supposed to be Culpable Season 2. And I was hired to help produce it. And they were like, we're going to send you to New Orleans to investigate this case. And we're going to send this retired detective that we know. And he's a stand-up comedian. Okay.
I mean.
So I get on my computer and I look this guy up. And I'm like all I can find about him is his comedy. Now, I will say I didn't listen to any of his comedy. I've only actually within the last couple of months listened to some of his comedy because my husband was like, does he have anything out there? And I was like, of course he does. And he had me listen. I was laughing so hard. So I look him up and all I can find is like all this comedy stuff. And I'm like, this guy's going to be on. I don't like it when someone is just on all the time. And I'm like, I don't even know how am I going to be boots on the ground investigating with a comedian? Like, what is he going to knock joke me? I mean, I don't. So I was a little concerned, but I was like, you know what? It's fine. It's whatever. I can work with anyone. And so I meet him and he doesn't look funny. He doesn't say anything funny. He looks kind of like gruff. And I'm like, so I feel like he and I were just like checking each other out, like scoping each other out, like what's going on with this one, you know. And as soon as, and he will tell, like, we actually talked to Cheryl about this, so I don't want to go too much into it because it's like that is a whole episode with her. But like, I literally get off the plane and hand him an itinerary because I'm like, this is what we're doing every single day, like by the hour. This is what I want to do. This is where I want to go. This is who I want to knock on their door. We need to get these records. We need to get a comment from this guy, and we need to figure all these things out. And we have this many days to do it. And so begins the relationship between Todd and I. So that's just how I am. Like, I will not go somewhere off the cuff not knowing what we're going to do. I need a plan. And that plan can certainly deviate. And if something happens and we go this way instead of this way, that's okay. But if I don't have something on paper and I literally print it out, I'm sorry, I waste paper and trees, but I literally print it out and I highlight and I have Post-its and I have notebooks and pins and extra pins in case you forgot yours. Like, we will be prepared for whatever happens. As long as you've got a gun strapped to you, we're good. So, you know, that's a partnership, right? Like, I'll bring the pens and paper and an itinerary detailed with all contact information for everyone that we might want to talk to. And every LexisNexis report I could pull on any possible person that could be involved with anything to do with the story. Neighbors, even, of people we're going to door knock. Like, we don't know. Maybe we want to talk to them, but now I'm going to know their name. I'm going to know their dog's name. I'm prepared. So I do some pretty heavy investigating and research before we ever go somewhere. So we get, you know, we're like hanging out, and something in the back of my mind, like, I'm like, I forgot he was a stand-up comedian, because I'm like, he's not even that funny.
Todd, I hope he toss that out there.
I had never told him that until we actually met with our partners for Burning Mountain Media for the first time in May of this year. And I'm telling them this story. And I said that out loud in front of Todd. And I told him later, I said, I meant that as a compliment. Because if you had been like cracking jokes and being funny nonstop and you were on, I would have been highly annoyed. I would have been like, I can't, like, shh. And he's one of those people, like, he picks his moments. I was like, you know, I think you're fucking hilarious, right? Like, you are a riot. But it's not like joke after joke after joke. I mean, so long story short, I think he's hilarious now. His shows are very funny. So look him up online and listen to some of his Bob and Tom and whatever, because he's hilarious. And by the way, little plug for Todd. He's going to be on Bob and Tom on Monday at 8 a.m. So tune in. But beyond that, like, Todd and I literally, from the moment we started talking, clicked. Like, we were in the zone immediately, and it's a rare thing. We have a very, as you can probably tell from what I just said, we have a very brother-sister relationship. But at the end of the day, we really respect what each other does, and our minds are so similar, but we have very different thoughts on things when it comes to investigations. And we just, you know, on that trip for Undetermined, which turned out to be Undetermined because while we were there, we were like, this isn't a culpable story. This is something different. And we actually came up with Undetermined sitting outside in the lobby of New Orleans in the French Quarter, drinking our 1,000th cup of coffee that day on hour 19 of my schedule, because we would sit there and just, like, you know, discuss what just happened that day or the case or like what we wanted to do. Like, it was just, our minds were just going, and we would sit there and talk. And that's how we came up with Undetermined, because everywhere we turned, that was the word that came up. So we just really hit it off. We really clicked. And it was like, this is a guy that I want to work with. This is my partner. So everything out from there on out, it was like, I want Todd to work on this with me. And so, you know, we've actually been developing the investigators. I don't know, for a while now, until we knew exactly what we wanted the show to be. You know, I had my ideas, he had his ideas, and we have worked to where we are doing exactly what we both want to do. So I'm so used to long form, and that's like where my love is investigating and deep dive and going for this long form 10-part series, whatever. Can't do that for a weekly, but we can tell a narrative story right up front. We also have the funny of Todd in the very beginning, and my snarky comebacks and laughing at him, not with him. And but at the end of the day, then it like comes back around to like, we're gonna read you into the story and the case, and it's like immediately this is about the victim and this is their story. And then we go into our war room, which is literally what we did in New Orleans, sitting outside in the lobby, or we'd go to our hotel, our producers, our audio engineer's hotel room, and we do debriefs every single night on everything that we just went over and investigate. And we'd sit and we'd watch body cam video and we'd analyze it and all that kind of stuff. That's what we do in the war room. We had like a whole board up with my index cards and post-it notes, and we put everything together in a timeline and showed everything that was going on and would go over that. So that's what we bring into the podcast then, is that from our war room. And so if you notice, like, my favorite thing to do is put everything into a timeline, and then the story comes out from there. And so you'll get a lot of the information and the facts and the things that we've uncovered in that part, but then you've got this incredible insight from someone who has 20 plus years investigating this kind of stuff. Todd's mind, and I told you, you know, some episodes that are coming up, it's going to blow your mind. It's cases I've covered, and his insight and his ideas for it, I'm like, oh, that's genius. Like, why? I mean, I would never think of that because I've never sat in an interrogation seat across the table from someone like that. I door knock. I ask them questions for the story. I don't ask them questions to get them prosecuted. So it's so fascinating to like hear how his brain works. So like that, we are both doing a show that we have really pieced together everything we love about true crime and what we both bring to it and what we love to do with it. And we've created a show around that. And I think that is really special because we both love it. And we love doing it. And it
comes out
great.
Folks. It comes out in the product.
It does. And the give and take is just perfect between you guys, and just the juxtaposition of your knowledge and his knowledge, and then but that you're both comfortable with each other, and it's wonderful. And it's, you know, if we're talking to Todd, then he's always telling us how great Jessica is at things, and now we have Jessica on and she's telling us how great Todd is. So clearly they need to be a team forevermore.
Yeah, and if that wasn't that was just such a perfect promotion of the podcast. I just put it in there. If you're not subscribed to it, please, you're gonna love it. Trust me. Go to the website, has all the links, and follow them on YouTube because there's gonna be some stuff dropping so that you're gonna want to hear. But I'm curious because that kind of led me. Well, there's so much I want. There's so many directions I want to go. First of all, I just want to kind of, what you said about Todd is so true. Like, he doesn't have to. He's not on, like when you guys were on for court hopping. He wasn't on that whole time. But when he came on, it was so funny. All of a sudden,
hilarious.
He brings out. He's got the bullhorn. It's like bullshit, and it was one of the funniest things that's happened on our stream since we had stream. But he doesn't. He's like you said. Like he doesn't. He's not on all the time. But when he comes in, it's fucking funny, man. So, and same with the pot. Like, he's gonna come in with some funny stuff, guys. So make sure you're checking that out. But what I want to ask is, I know you just talked about your timeline, and I know you could just tell you put a ton of work into these cases. So first of all, this is a two-parter. First of all, how much time would you say, I mean, I guess it's different for every case, but on average, how much do you put into a case? And secondly, how do you feel when you put a ton of work into a case and then all of a sudden you're getting called by, people to say, there's an arrest, we want you on Court TV. Like what is that feeling like?
Well, that's like a 3-parter, because if you're asking me like what the feeling is when I get a call from Court TV, it's like pure anxiety. Like I have a panic attack that I have to be live on TV. But that actually prepped me really well for today, because I was nervous to be on here, and I'm like, why? Because this is actually fun. Like I like talking to you guys. So I don't have to worry about sounding stupid, I guess. I don't know. So,
great.
How
long?
How long? Well, it depends on if you're talking my past life or my current life. I mean, 5 Roses podcast I investigated that for a year. It was a long time. Now that's not like all I did. I was working on daily stuff, weekly stuff, it was my passion project, right? So it can take as long as you're allowed to take, really. For this podcast and for these episodes, I mean, long time. I mean, it starts with, we talk to a family member, and sometimes in a lot of the cases we're working on right now, we're very fortunate that these families have done such amazing investigative work on their family member's case. So we get access to a lot of those case files. Sometimes though, that's not the case, and I have to go and request, and I actually request everything, even if we get things from the family members, just because sometimes there's a difference between what they give family, what they give for public records, what they give a journalist. Even though it's all public record, they may have missed something with them, and I like to cross-check everything. And I also like to give the police department the opportunity to do an interview with us, or at least to comment on the case and where they're at with everything. So, and like I said, if the family doesn't have the case file, that's okay. And I go and I request everything I can. And so from the moment we actually have information, and it's not always going to be having a whole case file. You're going to see that with like Crystal Rogers. Obviously, we don't have case files because they're trying to prosecute now. So there are other ways to tell these stories. But when we do have the case files, I mean, we're talking weeks of going through hundreds of pages of case files and all that information, because you don't want to miss anything and you want to make sure everything's right. And so from there, building on a timeline of everything that's in there, picking out some parts that really help tell the story and move it. And then, Todd and I work really well together in figuring out what is the best parts of this investigation that law enforcement, what we can hone in on and talk about, especially on Todd's side of things. So that's where you're going to notice, like in the war room, we pull out pieces of the investigation. Like we go through pretty much everything, but we really like to pull out some interesting parts of where we think by us bringing that to bringing some attention to it might help in some way. Or Todd may have an idea or, a theory that may be very different than what has been out there. And I think that's so invaluable to be able to do that. And at the same time, we're not putting down law enforcement didn't do their job, or, this is, whatever. It's not about that. It's about Todd has this expertise. He knows what he's talking about. And here's some other ideas with the suspicious death where we could go off on a different avenue and just lay it all out, because the point of an investigation is to look at everything and to look at every angle and to not have those blinders on. You should ask Todd about the case he had that he thought was a slam dunk because he had those on. And then it turns out it wasn't the right guy. That's a good story. He has a good story.
Okay.
Yeah. So that's the whole, that's what we go in with, is we're here to look at everything we possibly can get our hands on and lay it all out, because the investigation is about finding out what the truth is. It's not about, you know, I don't know. I don't know how else to put that. It's about finding out the truth, bringing awareness to these cases. And, as trite as it sounds, because I've been saying this for my whole career, but it really is, for me, giving them a voice. They don't have a voice anymore. The only voice they have is a lot of times these family members who are fighting their ass off to get someone to listen to them and to get someone to investigate. And so if we can help amplify their voice and their loved one's voice that's been forever silenced, that is the biggest honor that Todd and I can have, is to be able to do that for them.
Well, speaking of that, I know folks were commenting they liked all our shirts, but why don't you talk about your shirt, and also, talk about Bardstown, because for the folks that aren't familiar, with the story, and what the breaking news was last week. If you could let the folks know and talk about your shirt.
Yeah, so this shirt, by the way, it is Prayers for Crystal. And I just got this and 2 other shirts. Mary Daniel in Bardstown is part of Team Crystal in Bardstown. And if you're not familiar with the Crystal Rogers story, don't worry. Go check out our YouTube. We talk about it. Check out Jay's recording of CourtTV from earlier this week. And also stay tuned for The Investigators, because we're going to have a couple episodes coming up. But if you are in the Kentucky area, specifically Louisville, Bardstown, go to Liberty Tax in Bardstown, see Mary, and she'll hook you up with some shirts. But she's amazing. Team Crystal is this group who not only searched for Crystal all those years, but they've just rallied around the family. And so I'm proudly wearing the shirt in honor of Crystal and the whole family, the Ballard family, and all of Bardstown who want answers. And I think they're getting close. This week was huge. And actually, it happened last Thursday, but huge. So I can go into it a little bit and what's going on with it. So Crystal Rogers is one of the cases that I investigated in the Bardstown podcast. It's this small, gorgeous little town in Kentucky, not too far from Louisville. And they have all these unsolved murders, like year after year, 2013, 2014, 2015, 2016, like high profile, like unsolved murders. First one is a police officer for the Bardstown Police Department. That was where my start with Bardstown started. I covered that in 2013, living here in Cincinnati, because I'm not too far from Bardstown, and he was from here. So that was my start with it. Then I team up with Shay McAllister with Vault Studios, and she's working in Louisville at the TV station there. And she's covered Crystal's case. And so we go in together to investigate this. And long story short, Crystal Rogers is a mother of 5. She goes missing. And the last person known to see her is her boyfriend, Brooks Houck. And she's been missing for 8 years. The case has gone from the sheriff's office to the Kentucky State Police until 3 years ago when the FBI took over. And I would never even say this had been a cold case, because there's always been movement. And once the FBI took over, there was like movement at least once a year. So they were searching properties. They were searching Houck family properties. And thank you, Defense Diaries. Thanks, Bob. So they've been moving on this, I think, every step of the way. I think, when there's silence in a case, you think, no, oh, they're not working on it, or they're not working hard enough. I don't believe that in this case, because I feel like there's been stuff happening all along with it. And now it's finally coming to a place where I truly believe the dominoes are going to start to fall. This is just the first. So this man, Joseph Lawson, was arraigned last week. His arrests and his indictment and all that stuff, and his the charges, those all happened over the summer, and somehow they got hushed. I never heard of them until he got arraigned. And when he was arraigned last week, That was the big news, because it was the first time that anyone's heard the words murder associated with an arrest and Crystal Rogers. Now, everyone was saying this was the first arrest in connection to her disappearance. It actually wasn't. There was a man who was arrested named Danny Singleton, who was arrested in 2015, right after she disappeared. He had lied to a grand jury about his whereabouts when she disappeared. He's got connections to Brooke Hauk, longtime friend, full-time employee. He lived in one of his homes. I mean, so there's a connection. Well, he lies. He gets indicted on perjury, gets some lesser charge, gets out in 8 months. So he's out as far as I know. I don't believe we found him to be imprisoned anywhere right now. So he was actually the very first arrest. The only one until this one. This one was actually, though, charged with tampering with physical evidence and conspiracy to commit murder. So we've gone from a missing mother to conspiracy to commit murder. And one of the most interesting things about this is the whole premise of the charge, conspiracy to commit murder, means there is more than one person involved. This is a group act. This is more than one person. This means they made an agreement that they were going to conspire to commit murder. So we are not done here. This is number one, and I think we have at least this many more. And maybe this many after I've looked through a lot of my old paperwork.
Wow.
So it is, you know, there's always that saying, like, two can keep a secret but I'm telling you, that this is far from over, and it's been a huge week for the Ballard family. They've been praying for this and for what I believe is what's to come. You know, we're not done looking at this. We're going to keep covering it. And it's one of those cases. I mean, many of the Bardstown cases have stuck with me. Jason Ellis' case is one of the most tragic cases I've ever covered. And I covered it. I've covered it since 2013, multiple times. Crystal's case, her father's case, they touch you and they stick with you. And when you have covered and investigated and sat with the family for hours and hours and hours and gotten to know the person they've lost, and you never get to meet them, but you feel like you've gotten to know them through their love for them, all you want is for them to get the answers that they deserve and for them to get the justice and some peace. I hate the word closure because I don't know that even exists. I want them to have some peace. And so, yeah, I was telling you before we came on, anytime there's movement in this case, I immediately reach out to Sherry. And it's not for a story. I reach out to her because I have sat with her while she's cried over missing her daughter and not having answers and having to live in the same town where the man who has been publicly named by law enforcement as the main suspect in her disappearance is still walking around free. Mm-hmm. So I don't have skin in the game because these aren't my loved ones and I can't imagine what that's like. But they let me into their world for a moment, and I'm going to honor that by telling their story in the best possible way I can. And if that takes door knocking on some shithead's door, then that's what I'm going to do because they deserve answers. And that's why I do that. I don't door knock for me. I don't door knock for ratings. I door knock because she deserves answers for her daughter. And so I'm going to do whatever I can to get them.
And that is why, amongst many other things, is why you are a woman who fucking rocks. I mean, that is badass. And I can't believe it's already been like more than an hour. So if you have to go, you good? Are we good? Because we had some more. All right, cool.
Yeah.
One thing I wanted to bring in, you know, because Bob just asked, where are these shirts? And these are some exclusive publicly buzzed shirts. And talk about exclusives. We're about to drop another exclusive because I'm glad I see here that Steve from Publicly Buzzed is here. So I got a little exclusive soundbite that I'm going to play here. It's a current affair. I couldn't find anything better. But anyway, I wanted one that said exclusive, but I couldn't find one. Anywho, look out. Coming up soon in October, Feral Friday, Publicly Buzzed, and the Investigators. Look out, folks. Exclusive. You heard it here first. You guys love Jessica. You love Todd, and you're certainly going to love them with our beautiful boys. Actually, I should tell Jessica this story. Our beautiful boys, Steve and Dan. So I'm going to tell you this story quick, and then I know Shannon has you have a question, babe. You have.
I have like 100,000 that I could ask.
So I just want to tell you quickly.
Talk to her like all day. I just am like enthralled with you, Jessica. I want to become maybe your best friend. If you don't have one, meet another one. But I could seriously listen to you forever. I love how you tell a story. Your narrative structure is beautiful, and that draws me in the podcast. And I love the timeline element that you give to a story, because then I know where I'm going. And that was one thing with that Oakley Carlson episode, which I was bawling, but I didn't really piece that together from what I had read online. Like, I had the bare bones. And then when you put the timeline in, and you're also giving the narrative of the foster mother and just the way this child just was pure joy. This is your calling. You're amazing.
Thank you.
Okay, sorry that I went off on the fangirl moment.
Well, that's why she's here, because we should all be fangirling Jessica, and I see people in the chat are, and it's deserved. It's very deservedly so. What did I want to ask? You were
going to tell the beautiful boys.
No, I don't have to tell that story. What I want to ask, is, this is about Jessica, and what I want to ask is, we were talking about big cases or cases you've worked on, where you get a call and there's like updates. And I know you may have gotten a call. You may not be able to go into too many of the details, but maybe if you're following the investigators on YouTube, you might get an update. So can you give us a little teaser on something that may have come up recently?
It's been a week, guys. So I got a call today from one of my former colleagues in Atlanta. And there is a case that I worked on that is one of those other cases that truly has stuck with me. And when you see what I put out on Monday, you're going to know what I'm talking about. And it got solved. And she talked to one of the detectives. I talked to one of the detectives, and I won't mention one of the detectives' names because he's pretty high in the true crime world. People will know his name. But man, it was amazing. And it was one of those stories. I will tell you two things about that story. It's a really old, and it was cold. It was a cold case. Old. We're talking 50 plus years. Old. It's a horrific story, and I will share everything I have on it on Monday, and I can't wait for you to read what I did in Atlanta. And I think Todd and I might do something for YouTube just to bring everyone up to speed as to what happened. They're having a press conference on Monday, so that's why I can't talk about names in it. But there's some heartbreaking parts to this update, because as you can imagine, with being so old, her parents aren't here anymore. And when I had sat down with them, the mom was really ill when I interviewed her, and just very fragile. And she passed before my story ever came out. But the father was probably one of the most emotional interviews I've ever sat down to do. I think then he was like in his 80s. And I sat in his house just with him at his dining room table, and on the dining room table, he's just got every newspaper clipping from the 1970s from his daughter. And it's like going back in time with him and having him relive the most horrific moment of his life. on his dining room table, and he has like the last school picture of her, sitting there, and it's like faded, and he cries so hard when I'm talking to him and I'm interviewing him and I'm shooting video, because we did this for TV, we did it for digital, and I'm shooting video, and he doesn't even realize, like, his nose is just running down his face, and I hand him a tissue because he's in that moment back when it happened. And to have gone at that point, 40 plus years, not having those answers, not ever knowing what happened to his daughter, or knowing what happened to her, never knowing who did this to her. You watch this man had a lifetime, a hole in his heart for a lifetime. And I watched it run down his face. And I was talking to the detective who headed up the cold case at the time tonight. And I was telling him, after I did that interview, and I never put a time limit on myself to sit down with someone. So if they want to sit and talk to me for 8 hours in their home, I'm honored that they want to talk to me that long. I never look at my watch and I'm like, oh, it's 30 minutes in, I got to go. That's why I didn't like doing live TV, because I couldn't sit with those people for as long as I wanted to. And after I interviewed him, he was calling me every day. I mean, I didn't have any updates to his case. I was the journalist. I wasn't the detective. It wasn't about that for him. He just wanted to talk to someone who he'd already connected with and knew about his daughter, and just talk about it. And so, for months after I had interviewed him, he called almost every single day. And when I was talking to the detective tonight, he had called him every single day. And it wasn't about updates, because there wasn't any. I mean, there just wasn't. And there were only a certain amount of people in his life who knew about his daughter's case so intimately and knew his pain, that he wanted to reach out and talk to us. And I did, because why wouldn't I? I mean, I'm not just there to sit on a couch and take the interview and be done with it. I'm not a one and done. That's it. I'm done with the story. I'm over it. Like, no, these stories stick with me. They've let me into their hearts. They've let me into their homes. They've opened themselves up to old wounds, to new wounds. They open their soul to tell their story. Why would I not stay in contact with any one of them that wants to stay in contact with me? This is their story. This is their family member's story. I'm just the vessel that gets the honor to put it out there for everyone else to hear. And so, what those families go through and what they do to put their family member's story out there is one of the bravest things I could ever imagine doing. I don't think I could do it. I mean, I just said I was an introvert. I don't know that I would want to put my family story out there. They are so brave, and they're such warriors, and I applaud them for everything they do. And so this story that I told, and the case that is got resolution, is coming Monday, and it's a great week. It's a great week. I don't know if I got to the point of interviewing her father, but I found out from the detective today that he had actually passed away a year ago. And so he never got to see justice for his daughter. And I'll put this story up that I did when I was in Atlanta, where I interviewed him on Monday in my social. It's one of those stories, kind of like Oakley. Every time I watch him in this interview, I'm right back there with him, and I cry, because it breaks your heart that he lived so long without justice and without answers, without his daughter. And I almost called him when I found out today. And so I asked the detective, I was like, is he still around? I mean, he was really old when I interviewed him. So it was a crapshoot. And he said, no, he died a year ago. And I was like, oh. He never got to know. And when I interviewed him, I asked him what he would say to his daughter. And he said, I'll be seeing you soon. And so now the only solace that I can have for him is that he is with her. So that's my update.
You're so freaking awesome, Jessica. I'll just give you a tip because I learned this because I've cried sometimes on the stream. Gum. We call it our crying gum because I've cried a few times and everyone's like, you gotta get gum. So we call it our crying gum. But man, I feel like I need it. I need it myself.
People on the chat are saying the gum isn't working.
The gum isn't working. Well, wow.
This just took a turn. What happened? Let's get back to funny. Where's Todd? Bring Todd on.
Well, why don't we talk about what's the plans? We got CrimeCon coming up. What can you talk about some of the? And while we are, folks, since I finally fucking figured out how to do this, and now it's not going to work. I hope it works. I want to put up the chat right underneath here, and I want everyone to let Jessica know how fucking awesome she is. Throw it up. No, don't ask me about my bidet. We don't have to talk about my bidet. Everyone, throw up in the chat how awesome Jessica is. And Jessica, tell us, what are the plans or that you could tell us about going into CrimeCon?
So CrimeCon, Todd and I are going to be there. We're going to be at Podcast Row with our buddies, Bob and you guys are going to be there next year, but we're going to see Bob, sure. We're going to see Cheryl, we're going to see CrimeCon is like, you get to see all your friends once a year. It's like we all get together and it's like, hi. And then you meet all of your new friends. Like you meet so many people and it's like, it's true crime advocates, it's true crime fans, it's true crime listeners, it's true crime content creators, it's experts, it's such a mix. Todd's first time was last year, and he was blown away because he had no idea what to expect. I'm like, there's no way to explain it because it's like, it's just this community of awesome because it is, incredible speakers who are not only advocates, there's family members. I mean, Carrie Rosin, for goodness sake, is going to be there. There's so many people, all the way around the true crime genre that are going to be there. But Todd and I are going to be there at the Burning Mountain Productions booth, Podcast Row. It's a pretty large booth. Our partner's got the biggest booth there is. So
nice.
We will not, you won't be able to miss us. Like you walk in, we saw the map the other day. So you walk in and we're going to be like right there. And if you miss us, we'll have to talk about fundraising for glasses or something. Because, like, seriously, like we got a spitting thing. I mean, it's a little ostentatious, but it's going to be amazing. So the investigators will be there. Todd and I are going to do that. We're going to, we have a very special type of episode once a month that we're calling Across the Table. And we're going to be conducting a handful of those interviews live from CrimeCon. No spoiler alert, but Cheryl's going to sit down with us. But the best part is our first episode, our premiere Across the Table episode is these two.
Yeah, baby. Our first podcast. We had so much fun and like, it's
so great.
We just solidified. We're like, these are two new bows in J-Bo Nation. We just knew that they were going to fit in with this group, J-Bo Nation, J-Buzz Nation. It's our first podcast. It's coming out next week. We're so excited. We had so much fun. And I wanted you to tell a story, and probably this will be lighting up. Todd told the story, and I'm sure you know the story, but can you tell the folks when you were at CrimeCon and you met Nancy Grace, what she said to Todd?
Okay, so first of all, that was Todd meeting Nancy Grace for the first time. Nancy Grace and I are buds. We've been friends since 2007. That was Jessica's very first live spot. Actually, it was my very first on camera and live And by the way, Nancy Grace. So I was
Holy
like,
shit.
you talk about nervous as shit. Like, I had someone had to do my hair, someone had to do my makeup. I didn't know what the hell I was doing. And it was for the Paige Johnson story. She had disappeared, and I had covered it extensively. So Nancy Grace wanted me to be on for it. And I'm like, and I'll tell you that story first, and then I'll tell you the Todd story.
Yes,
if that's
tell
okay.
that story. Yes.
That's baptism by fire right there. Like, throw you in.
It totally was. I was so nervous. And I've never, like, you know, you get your earpiece so that you can hear what's going on. Like, there was a producer speaking in your ear, and I'm like, and I was so nervous. Nancy is like, I mean, like, bulldog coming at you, and I'm like, I'm just reporting the facts here. I don't, and so, long story short, I made it through my first one. She'd had me back on multiple times after that, so I guess I wasn't that bad. And ever since then, so then I moved to Atlanta, and so I don't remember what she was on then. I want to say Fox maybe was what she was doing then, or maybe that was back during CNN, HLN. I don't know. It was whatever she was doing in 2007. I've been with her almost on every single one she's done. And then when I was in Atlanta, that's where she's at. So I had worked with her a couple of times there. Anytime she was covering a case I was covering, I'd be on her show, specifically her podcast while I was there. So she has like broken me into live TV, into being a podcast guest, into like being on shows to talk about cases I'm covering. Like, she has really helped me break into that. And let me just tell you a secret about Nancy Grace. She's not scary in person. She is the sweetest lady you're ever going to meet in person. So I love her. I love the work she does. So I was like so excited for Todd to meet her last year for his very first time. He likes Nancy Grace. I'm like, oh, well, we're pals, so let me introduce you. And we go over, and I'm like, hey, Nancy, I wanted you to meet my partner. This is Todd McComas. And she, the first thing out of her mouth is, who smoked? Todd looked like he was like a 12-year-old that just got caught smoking in the boys' bathroom. He was like, me. And she lays into him like, you do know that will kill you. You will get cancer. That will kill you. You promise me right now that you're going to stop smoking. That's disgusting. You stink. It's going to hurt you. It's going to kill you. Like, this whole like mama bear laying into him. And he's just like, yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am.
Smart move.
And then she took a picture with us.
That's
so
such a
I
great
should post
story.
that picture. So you can see Todd's face, and like she's all like, now she's like, yay, Todd.
That's such a great story. Wow, Jessica. Thank you so much for coming. This is so amazing, and like we could probably go on for another 2 hours. You are so cool, and you've done so much stuff, and you care. It's just so clear, obviously, and you're genuine, and you're funny, and you're awesome, and you are a woman who rocks. So thank you so much, babe. Any final thoughts?
No, I want to just say thank you for also being able to tell these stories for people, because there's not, like you said, they're voiceless, and a lot of people don't have the emotional capacity to be the kind of vessel that you've been, especially not in the long term, because you've been doing this for so long. So they get your expertise, but they also get access to somebody that's able to hold and contain that for them. And I mean, as a mental health professional, like, people like you are just, you're rare and you're invaluable.
Thank you, guys.
Anything you want to plug? Anything you want to tell people? Obviously, we say this every time when Bob's on, but go on the podcast, give it 5 stars. It gets it in the algorithm. We don't know what that means. It just, the AI gods, they say, oh, this is a 5-star. I'm I'm going to share this with more people. Tell people, share it on Facebook, share it on Twitter. You don't know. Sometimes people are like, oh, I can't. One retweet could hit a person that like has a case that needs to be investigated and wants to send it to Jessica and Todd. So share it out there. Bob says it's critical. So any last words, Jessica?
Yeah, I mean, if you have a story, it doesn't have to be your family member's story. If there's a story in your town or like one that's kind of eaten at you and gnawed at you over the years, like send us some links. I mean, we start from that kind of stuff all the time. Because anyone who watches the news or even in your own hometown, like there are stories that just stick with you. I mean, you don't have to be involved in any way. And so I welcome those stories. And we have a case submission link on our website now. So anyone who has a story they want us to cover, if you are someone that's involved in the case and you have case files, there's a way to upload those for us. The more we have, the better, but we can start from ground zero if we need to. If it's just a case that has really been eating at you and you want us to look at it.
Awesome. All right, guys. Well, I have set up the portal. This is going into Publicly Buzzed stream tonight. So when I hit this, it's going to tell you to go into his stream. So make sure that you like it. He's been working on this all week. It's very cool. So this is a gentleman that the FBI called a spy. George Maschke, I believe is his name. It's regarding a polygraph and some things that he polygrapher, lie detector. It's going to be awesome. So check it out. And I think that's all we got. So deuces, YOLO, fuck you, Ted.